When his eyes met mine across the hall, time seemed to freeze. The king had removed his glove, tossing it to the floor in a silent challenge that made everyone hold their breath. "You don't know what you're doing to me," he murmured, and in that instant, I knew my life would never be the same. The wolf had been unleashed, and I, a poor, nameless orphan, was both his prey and his salvation. How could I choose between loyalty and survival? Before we delve into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. It was on the night of the harvest feast that everything began. The castle hall gleamed like liquid gold, chandeliers pouring light over silk gowns and jewels that cost more than my entire existence was worth. I didn't belong in that place. That was clear in the eyes of the ladies who averted their gaze when they saw me, in the whispers that rose like snakes as I passed. My mended dress smelled of wax and loneliness, an inheritance from someone whose face I could no longer recall. The servants called me the bastard. The nobles pretended not to see me. I was merely the coin of a debt, brought to the palace as payment for something I never fully understood. I learned to breathe without making a sound, to exist in the shadows, to make myself as small as possible. That night, however, destiny decided to pluck me from anonymity. The music stopped abruptly. The murmur of conversations shattered like glass. And then, cutting through the newly formed silence, a voice, that voice, echoed through the stone walls. "You paid for me. Now do it!" That cry pierced the air, freezing the entire hall. I recognized it immediately. Brad, the Omega, the man who had once offered me shelter when I had nothing, no name, no roof. The same man who now stood defying the king himself, his body marked by recent scars that spoke of punishments I dared not even imagine. I felt the blood drain from my face as all eyes turned to me. Suddenly, I was at the center of a storm I didn't understand, dragged into the abyss by words that were not my own. The king rose slowly. It was as if time bent before that simple gesture, as if the very air grew denser in his presence. Torchlight danced on the metal of the brooch on his shoulder, a silver wolf with ruby eyes. There was something inhuman about him. Not mystical or supernatural, but primitive and fierce. A force contained in silence that made my heart beat like a caged bird. When his gaze met mine, I felt my entire body tremble. It wasn't fear, though my knees threatened to give way. It was recognition, as if some part of me, hidden deep in my soul, had always known this moment would come. His steps echoed like drumbeats as he walked toward us. The hall held its breath collectively. Not even the wind dared to blow through the tall windows as the Alpha King positioned himself before Brad. "You know the price of words," he murmured, his voice deep as stone under deep water. "I know," Brad replied. And then, turning to me with eyes that pleaded for forgiveness, he whispered almost soundlessly, "It was for her. It was always for her." My heart broke into 1,000 pieces because in that instant I understood. Brad had sold his own blood, his own body, his own soul to buy my freedom. And now he was demanding a promise from the king, sealed with his name, his suffering, his voluntary servitude. "Do it," he had said. But what was it? What could compel a king to release what he held locked behind his cold eyes? I had no time to search for answers. The king turned to me, his dark blue eyes like a stormy sky. He extended his hand in my direction, and the hall plunged into a silence so profound I could hear my own heart beating. "He paid for you," the king said, his voice too soft not to be threatening. "So will you obey him or me?" The question fell upon my shoulders like a sentence. I saw the trap disguised as a choice, the condemnation hidden in a false redemption. If I obeyed Brad, I would be a traitor to the crown. If I obeyed the king, I would deny the sacrifice of the one who had risked everything to save me. I felt the weight of the walls, the scent of wine mixed with sweat and fear, the candles bending in the heavy air. The room spun around me. "Tell me, girl," the king insisted, something wild gleaming in the depths of his eyes. "To whom does your loyalty belong?" I looked at Brad, my eyes welling with tears. On his face was written a story of pain I couldn't fully read. Then I turned to the king, whose presence burned like embers beneath cold skin. And there, before all those nobles who had never considered me more than dust, I realized a bitter truth. My life had never been my own. I was merely the echo of decisions made by other men, a leaf swept away by the current of others' wills. I will do what is just, I whispered, and the word just seemed to awaken something primitive and dangerous in the king's gaze. His eyes ignited with a flame that was not of this world. In a slow, deliberate gesture that no one dared to interrupt, he removed his black leather glove and threw it onto the marble floor. The dry sound echoed through the hall like the roar of a freed beast. It was there, at that exact moment, that the Alpha King unleashed his lunar wolf. There was no visible metamorphosis, no physical transformation that eyes could perceive. It was an internal rupture, as if something wild and ancient emerged from a deep prison. His eyes darkened, his voice took on a husky, almost animalistic timbre, and the air around him seemed to vibrate with contained energy. The hall filled with frightened murmurs. Ladies recoiled, raising handkerchiefs to their lips. Gentlemen paled, hands instinctively reaching for the hilt of absent swords. He approached me, so close that the heat of his breath mingled with mine, so close I could see the wild gold that now dominated the blue of his eyes. "You call it just," he said, his words laden with dark promises. "Then you will learn what justice means before a king." That phrase broke something inside me. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. His gaze was touch enough, invasive and burning, inevitable as gravity itself. In the same instant, guards emerged from the shadows and dragged Brad away, while I remained there, exposed to everyone's judgment. The women whispered about the insolent bastard. The men exchanged complicit glances. Fate had decided to punish my existence, and I had no weapons to fight. In the days that followed, I lived in a limbo of silence and waiting. The king did not summon me, did not demand my presence, but his shadow seemed to follow me through the cold corridors of the castle. The servants avoided my eyes as if looking directly at me could attract a curse. Only the old seamstress still spoke to me, always whispering that wolves never truly sleep, that the moon calls even when hidden by clouds. I began to dream of the sound of the glove falling on the marble, of the wild gleam in those blue eyes piercing the darkness to find me. I would wake up gasping, sweating, a scream caught in my throat and a strange heat spreading through my body. Until one night, passing through the empty hall after helping in the kitchen, I found him. He stood before the tall window, observing the moon that hung over the distant mountains. The silver light reflected on the armor leaning against the floor. He wore no crown, only the weight of his own silence. "Why did you bring me here?" I dared to ask, my voice too small for the space between us. He did not turn. Because he asked. And because I wanted to know what in him was worth so much. The wind entered through the window, bringing the scent of distant rain and pine trees. Everything about him was restraint, from the way he held his hands behind his back to the contained gesture of turning his face. And yet, when his eyes returned to mine, I felt that something within him, perhaps that lunar wolf everyone feared, recognized me as the same mirror he avoided looking into. "You don't know what you're doing to me," he murmured, words that sounded like a confession torn from him against his will. "Neither do you." "Your Majesty," I replied, surprised by my own audacity, and in that instant, I understood the truth that would change everything. The debt that had dragged me there was not made of gold, but of blood, silence, and contained desire. The Omega had paid for me, but the true price began now, within that gaze that promised ruin and salvation at the same time. I was the coin. I was the reason. And he, the Alpha King, the man who had unleashed his own wolf because of me, would also be my prison and my condemnation. The days dragged on like lazy shadows in the castle corridors. After that nocturnal encounter with the king, something had changed, not just between us, but within me. I began to notice different looks from the servants, as if I carried an invisible mark. Some chambermaids would shy away when I passed. Others, bolder, studied me with ill-disguised curiosity. That morning, I woke to a firm knock on the door of the small room assigned to me. It was no more than a cubicle in the servants' quarters, but it was mine, the only space where I could breathe without fear of judgment. "Come in," I murmured, adjusting my worn nightgown over my shoulders. It was Hilda, the old seamstress, carrying a package wrapped in raw linen. "The king orders your presence in the library after breakfast," she announced, placing the package on the narrow bed. Her grey eyes revealed nothing, but her hands trembled slightly. "And he orders you to wear this." When the linen unfolded, the world seemed to lose its breath. There was a dress such as I had never seen, much less touched. Dark, blue silk like a night sky, embroidered with tiny crystals that caught the light like imprisoned stars. The long sleeves had a cut reminiscent of bird wings, and the bodice, though modest, was structured to accentuate every curve I barely knew I possessed. "I can't," I stammered, touching the fabric with my fingertips as if it might burn. "This isn't for someone like me." Hilda smiled, a sad smile laden with ancient secrets. "Child, you still don't understand, do you? The wolf has already chosen its prey. Now it remains to be seen if you will be devoured, or if you will become part of the pack." Her words chilled me, but I had no time to question. She was already leaving, closing the door and leaving me alone with that dress that seemed alive, breathing dangerous possibilities. The library was in the west wing of the castle, unfamiliar territory to me. I walked through the corridors feeling like an imposter. The dress moved with me like water, whispering secrets against my skin. Servants stopped what they were doing to stare at me, and for the first time, there was no disdain in their gazes, only astonishment and perhaps fear. When I reached the great carved oak door, I hesitated. What awaited me beyond it? Why had the king summoned me? Questions piled up like storm clouds. "Enter!" The voice came from within before I even knocked. How did he know I was there? I pushed open the heavy door, and the world transformed. The library was a cave of knowledge, with shelves reaching to the soaring ceiling, movable dark wood ladders, and stained glass windows that painted the sunlight in impossible colours. The scent of old paper, leather, and candle wax created an almost sacred atmosphere. The king stood before one of the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore black, as always, but without the pomp of royalty, just fitted trousers and a fine linen shirt that revealed the contained strength of his shoulders. Without his crown, without armor, he seemed almost human. Almost. "You came," he said, turning to me. His eyes swept over my body slowly, lingering on the way the dress embraced my waist. "And you accepted my gift." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I had no choice, Your Majesty." An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "There are always choices, girl. Even when they seem non-existent." He gestured to a worn leather armchair near the unlit fireplace. I sat, my back rigid, my hands clasped in my lap. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked, remaining standing, the distance between us charged with unspoken tension. "No, sir. The Omega made a deal with me. His freedom for your protection." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of confusion. "Protection? From what?" "From whom?" he corrected, approaching with silent predatory steps. "Duke Norrington will arrive in 3 days for the winter assembly. He brings with him the one you knew as father." My blood ran cold. Baron Ashworth? The man who had raised me as his daughter until he discovered I was not of his blood, that I was merely the result of his late wife's affair with a servant. The man who had driven me into the streets when I turned 16, with only the clothes on my back. "He can't take me," I whispered, more to myself than to the king. "He disowned me." "And now he wants you back," the king said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It seems your mother left a considerable inheritance in your name, which can only be accessed when you turn 21. Or when you marry." Reality hit me like a slap. My 21st birthday was less than a month away. The Baron wanted to reclaim me merely to control the fortune that, by right, was mine. And Brad knew this. The king nodded, finally sitting in the armchair opposite me. The Omega has keen ears and a quick tongue. A useful combination. He discovered the Baron's plans and came to me, offering himself as a lifelong servant if I guaranteed your protection. "Why would he do that?" "That," the king replied, leaning forward until I could feel his warm breath against my face. is what I would like to know. What is it about you, a nameless bastard, that is worth the sacrifice of a free man? His words stung like daggers, but I kept my chin high. Nothing, apparently. Or you wouldn't be questioning me. Something dangerous gleamed in his eyes. The wolf stirring beneath the civilized surface. Watch your tongue, girl. There are limits even to my curiosity. I bit my lip, regretting my audacity. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but I have no answer to your question. Brad and I lived on the same streets for some time, shared the same abandoned shelter during a harsh winter. Perhaps it is merely gratitude. Gratitude, he repeated, the words sounding strange in his mouth like an alien concept. Perhaps. Or perhaps he sees in you what I am beginning to glimpse. Before I could ask what he meant, the king rose and walked to one of the bookshelves. He removed a small book bound in worn red leather. Can you read? He asked, turning to me. I nodded. My mother, the Baroness, insisted I learn before she died. Good, he said, extending the book toward me. Read this, study it, know it as you know yourself. I took the book with trembling hands. There was no title on the cover, only a carved symbol, a wolf howling at the moon. What is this? The Law of the Wolf, he replied, his eyes fixed on mine. The history of my clan, of my origins. If you want to survive in this castle, if you want to understand what is happening around you, you must know the codes by which we live. Why would you show me this? I am just a piece on the board, he interrupted, his voice cutting like thin ice. But even pawns can bring down kings if played correctly. I swallowed hard, holding the book against my chest like a shield. And who plays me, Your Majesty? You or the Baron? A dark smile curved his lips. That, little wolf, depends entirely on you. That afternoon, locked in my tiny room, I devoured the book like a starving person. The pages revealed a history older than the kingdom itself. The story of men and women who carried the spirit of the wolf, not as a curse, but as a gift. It told of the first Alpha King, who united the wild tribes under his leadership, taming the inner wolf to rule with wisdom and strength. It spoke of the rituals, the codes of honor, the meaning of the full moon. But most importantly, it spoke of bonds, deep ties that bound an alpha to his chosen mate, bonds that transcended time and space, bonds that, once formed, could not be broken even by death. When the sun began to set, painting my room orange and red, I was no longer the same. Knowledge pulsed in my veins like a second blood, and I finally began to understand the deadly game I found myself in. The Alpha King had revealed his wolf on the night of the feast, and, in some inexplicable way, that wolf had recognized me. The book spoke of this too, of the moment the wolf chooses even before its human bearer can comprehend, of the hunger that follows, the obsession, the need to mark territory. May the gods help me, I whispered to the empty room, closing the book with trembling fingers, because now I knew the gift the king had given me was not just a dress. It was a declaration of intent, dark blue, the traditional color with which an alpha marked his intended. I was being courted by a wolf. The following morning brought with it the weight of a revelation I was still trying to absorb. The book the king had given me remained hidden beneath my thin mattress, its words echoing in my mind like a dangerous enchantment. The laws of the wolf seemed primitive and wild for a kingdom that prided itself on its civility. But they explained so many things. The way nobles avoided the king's direct gaze, the strange rituals I observed in the corridors, even the fearful respect with which everyone treated the full moon. That morning, I was assigned to help with the preparations for the winter assembly. The great hall was being transformed, new tapestries covered the stone walls, long oak tables were polished until they reflected the torch flames, and the throne, that dark wood seat carved with wolves and ancient trees, received new crimson velvet upholstery. You girl, be careful with that, the sharp voice snapped me out of my thoughts. Lady Eleanor, the palace governess, watched me with eyes sharp as daggers. I was carrying a box of precious crystals that would be used to serve the noble visitors. Forgive me, madam, I murmured, straightening my posture. The crystals tinkled delicately. The king may have his whims, she said, approaching so close I could smell the lavender and disdain that emanated from her. But make no mistake, to all of us you remain what you always were, nothing. Her words were distilled poison, but I kept my chin high. The book had given me something I had never possessed before: context. Lady Eleanor was not just cruel, she was a challenged beta. Within the clan hierarchy, beta women held prominent positions, second only to the Queen. A position that had remained vacant since the death of the king's wife 3 years prior. "I understand my place, madam," I replied with studied softness, lowering my eyes in a sign of submission, but not too much. Enough to appear respectful, not enough to appear defeated. She narrowed her eyes, noticing the subtle change in my posture. "What does he see in you?" she murmured, more to herself than to me. I did not answer. There was no answer that was not dangerous. Lady Eleanor shook her head and walked away, her dark green dress rustling like dry leaves in the wind. I continued my work in silence, but now I was conscious of the glances that followed me. The kitchen staff, the guards, even the other servants, all studied me when they thought I wasn't noticing. After years of being invisible, now I was the center of unwanted attention. At midday, when the bell announced the servants' meal, I did not go to the refectory as usual. Something urged me outside into the open air, away from curious glances and malicious whispers. I crossed a side corridor and stepped into the castle's inner gardens. Winter was approaching, and the gardens were almost deserted. Bare trees stretched, branches like skeletal fingers toward the grey sky, and the central fountain was covered by a thin layer of ice. I sat on a stone bench taking a piece of bread I had saved from breakfast from my sleeve. That's when I heard his voice. "I thought I'd find you here." I turned, startled. Brad stood a few feet away, his lean body even more emaciated after days in the dungeons. His face was marked by new scars, his eyes hollow, but alive. "Brad!" I exclaimed, running to him. I stopped a step away, uncertain if I should touch him. "How did you—" "The king released me this morning," he said, a sad smile playing on his cracked lips. "But I cannot stay long. He has assigned me to the outer stables." My eyes filled with tears. "Because of me. All of this is because of me." Brad shook his head. "Don't blame yourself, little one. I made my choices." "Why?" I asked, the same question the king had asked. "Why sacrifice yourself like this for me?" He looked beyond me to the distant mountains that surrounded the valley. "Because you saved me first, though you don't remember." "What are you talking about?" "That winter, in the abandoned barn. You shared your last crumb of bread with me when I was too sick to get up. You covered me with your only cloak when fever consumed me. You sang to chase away my nightmares." His eyes returned to mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't fully name. No one had ever shown such kindness to an Omega. Memories returned in fragments. Brad trembling with fever, me desperate for help, the endless nights singing lullabies my adoptive mother used to sing. "That's nothing compared to what you did for me," I whispered. "It's everything," he replied, finally touching my face with rough fingers. "It's all that matters in this cruel world." A sound interrupted us, footsteps on dry leaves. Brad recoiled immediately, lowering his head in a submissive posture. "Your Majesty," he murmured. The king emerged from the shadow of an ancient tree, his blue eyes cold as the ice on the fountain. He wore no crown, but his entire being exuded authority. He approached with deliberately slow steps, measuring each movement. "Ah, the Omega should be in the stables," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "It's my fault," I quickly interjected. I detained him. "I know exactly whose fault it is," the king replied, without taking his eyes off Brad. "Go." It was a direct order. Brad bowed briefly and walked away, giving me a last look that said everything that could not be spoken aloud. When we were alone, the king turned his attention to me. Something in his posture had changed. There was a tension in his shoulders, a rigidity in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "You read the book," he stated. It wasn't a question, but I confirmed it anyway. "Yes." "And did you understand?" I hesitated. Some parts, others, are hard to believe. An enigmatic smile curved his lips. Truth often is. He approached closer until we were just a step apart. The same space I had kept from Brad, but charged with a completely different tension. The king was almost a head taller than me, and his presence seemed to occupy all the air around us. "What does the Omega mean to you?" he asked abruptly. The question caught me off guard. He is my friend, the only one I have." "Friend," the king repeated, the word sounding strange in his mouth. "And what if I ordered you never to speak to him again?" A chill ran down my spine. "Would you do that?" "Answer the question." I swallowed hard, knowing I was in dangerous territory but unable to lie. I would obey in public, as I must, but in my heart, I could not abandon him. I expected anger, perhaps punishment for my insolent honesty. Instead, the king threw his head back and laughed, a surprisingly human sound coming from that restrained man. "You are fascinating," he said when his laughter ceased. "So small, so seemingly fragile, yet with a core of steel." I didn't know how to respond to what seemed like an unexpected compliment. "Duke Norrington arrives tomorrow," he continued, his tone returning to normal. "And with him, your former master." "The Baron is not my master," I corrected before I could stop myself. "Not anymore." The king nodded, seemingly pleased with my answer. "Good. But he will try to reclaim you, using common law and the inheritance as justification." "And what will happen?" "That," he said, touching my face exactly where Brad had touched moments before, "depends on your answer to a very simple question." His touch burned like ice, sending waves of heat and cold simultaneously through my body. "What question?" The king leaned in until his lips brushed my ear, his warm breath against my skin, making my knees tremble. "Do you allow my wolf to claim you as his?" The words from the book rushed back to my mind in a whirlwind. A claim was not an ordinary marriage proposal. It was something primal, wild, irrevocable. It was giving up one life to accept another, completely unknown. It was becoming part of the clan, protected by its ancient laws, but also subject to them. "Why?" I whispered, repeating the question that seemed to haunt me. "Why me?" He pulled back enough to look into my eyes. Something in his gaze had changed. There was a vulnerability there I had never seen before. "Because when my wolf looked at you, he recognized something I have denied for too long. Something that even I don't fully comprehend." "And what happens if I say no?" His face closed off again, the king's mask returning to place. "Then I will follow the path laid out. I will marry Ravenna, strengthen the northern border. And you." He hesitated, something painful crossing his face. "You will be protected as much as possible. The Omega will ensure your inheritance is preserved." "Brad?" I asked, surprised. "What does he have to do with this? Why do you think he offered himself as a servant? Why do you think he was willing to sacrifice everything?" The king shook his head as if the answer were obvious. "He knew your former master would come for you. He knew I was the only possible protection. And, in his desperation, he offered the only thing he had, his freedom." "For me," I whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. "He did all this for me." "For love?" the king corrected, the words sounding strange in his mouth. Something I barely comprehend, caught between duty and desire. The revelation hit me like lightning. Brad loved me enough to give up everything. And the king. The king was torn between what he had to do and what his wolf demanded. And me? What did I want? I looked at the still water of the well, its surface so clear it seemed like a mirror. In it, I saw my reflection, no longer the frightened orphan, but a woman facing a choice that would define not only her destiny, but that of others as well. "What is this place?" I asked, my fingers touching the stone edge of the well. "The Well of Truth," he replied. "Where the first alpha found his wolf, where every clan leader must face their dual nature. And now you choose," he extended. His hand over the well, his palm turned upward in an invitation. "The wolf or the king? The truth of the heart or the truth of the crown?" My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The choice seemed impossible. To accept the wolf meant entering a world I barely understood, becoming part of something wild and ancient. But to refuse meant returning to life as it was before, or worse, falling into the Baron's hands. "What if I don't know the truth of my own heart?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "Then ask it," the king replied, indicating the well with a gesture. "The waters do not lie." I leaned over the crystalline surface, my reflection trembling slightly. What did I see there? A frightened orphan? A royal contender? A woman torn between two men, the friend who had sacrificed everything and the king? Who defied his own nature? "I see nothing but myself," I confessed. "Then perhaps that is the truth you seek," he said, his voice gentle. "Who are you, beyond the labels others have given you? Bastard, orphan, servant, contender? Who is the woman behind these names?" The question reverberated within me like a bell. Who was I really? Not what others saw, not what others wanted me to be, but myself, in my essence. And it was then that I understood. The choice was not between the king and Brad, between security and uncertainty. The choice was mine, the first truly mine in my entire life. "I choose," I said, raising my eyes from the well to meet his gaze, "myself." Something wild and profound gleamed in his eyes. Surprise, admiration, perhaps even respect. "Explain," he asked, his voice husky. "I will not be claimed as an object, neither by the king nor by the wolf. I will not be protected as a helpless child, neither by Brad nor by you. If you wish to court me, you will have to do so as a man, not as a beast. If you want my heart, you will have to earn it, not demand it." I expected anger, perhaps punishment for my audacity. Instead, I saw something I had never imagined seeing on the face of that powerful man: admiration. Slowly the man, knelt, not before me, but before the well, his hands touching the crystalline water. "In all my years," he said, his voice more human than I had ever heard, "no one has ever dared to speak to me in this way, not even the wolf." "Perhaps that is why he chose me," I replied, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed. "Because he finally found someone who fears neither the man nor the beast." He raised his face, water dripping from his fingers, and something had changed in his gaze. It was as if a barrier had fallen, as if two separate parts had finally met. "Then I make my choice too," he said, rising. "Not as king, not as wolf, but as a man." And there, under the bluish light of the ancient torches, he extended his hand to me, not as an order, not as a demand, but as an invitation. "My name," he said, words I had never heard him utter, "is Alaric. And if you allow it, I would like to get to know you, not as a subject, not as a contender, but as the woman you choose to be." I looked at his outstretched hand, at the man who had finally emerged from the shadow of the crown and the wolf. And I made my choice. "My name," I replied, placing my hand over his, "is Eleanor, and I accept your invitation, Alaric. Not as a promise, not as a contract, but as a beginning." When our hands touched over the waters of the Well of Truth, something happened. Something I cannot explain with earthly words. It was as if an invisible thread stretched between us, ancient as time and new as the dawn. It was not the wild claim of the wolf, nor the calculated alliance of the king. It was something deeper, truer. It was choice, mutual, free, human. And when we left that ancient cavern side by side, we were two different people from those who had entered. What would happen when we faced the world above? The Baron, Lady Ravenna, the Winter Assembly? I did not know. But for the first time in my life, uncertainty did not terrify me because finally, I knew who I was. Dawn arrived too quickly, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold that seemed to mock the tension hanging over the castle. During the night, the first carriages had begun to arrive. Nobles from distant lands, ambassadors from neighbouring kingdoms, all converging for the Winter Assembly. From my small room in the servants' quarters, I could hear the growing buzz, the shouted orders, the castle awakening to the day that promised to change everything. After leaving the Well of Truth cavern the night before, Alaric, it was still strange to think of him by name, not as the king, had escorted me to my chambers in silence. There had been no kisses, no vows, no grand promises, only a look laden with something we couldn't name, and his last words before leaving. Tomorrow, when the Baron arrives, stand by my side, not as a servant but as a guest of the crown. Now, as I prepared to face the day, those words echoed in my mind. What would it be like to present myself no longer as the nameless bastard, but as… what exactly? We weren't engaged. There was no formal commitment. I had refused the wolf's claim, and he had accepted my decision. What were we now? A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Hilda entered carrying a new dress, more impressive than the previous one. It was a deep blue like the night sky, but with silver details that resembled stars and a crescent moon. A court dress, not a servant's. "It's time," she said, her wrinkled face more serious than ever. "The Baron has just passed through the gates." My stomach clenched. "He came with the Duke?" Hilda nodded, helping me into the elaborate gown. Duke Norrington's entire retinue, 15 carriages, armed guards, ladies in waiting. A show of force, no doubt. "And Brad?" I asked as she adjusted the bodice. "Is he all right?" "The Omega was removed from the stables during the night," Hilda replied, her nimble fingers working the laces. "The king has assigned him to the personal guard of the North Wing." The news surprised me. The North Wing housed the royal apartments and council chambers, positions of great trust, not punishment. "Why?" I asked, confused. Hilda smiled a smile full of ancient wisdom. "Because the wolf recognizes loyalty when he sees it, and because a wise king keeps friends close, and rivals even closer." "Brad is no one's rival," I protested. "All men are rivals when they love the same woman," she replied simply, "even when one of them knows he cannot have her." Her words left me speechless. We finished the preparations in silence, my hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, a silver necklace with a small moon pendant, soft slippers that matched the dress. When we finished, Hilda led me not through the servants' corridors, but through the grand halls of the palace. Nobles were already circulating, conversing in groups, studying me with ill-disguised curiosity as we passed. I recognized some faces from the harvest feast, now transformed by surprise at seeing the bastard dressed as a court lady. "Ignore them," Hilda whispered, sensing my discomfort. "They only have the power you grant them." We finally reached the great hall, where the throne awaited on the raised dais. The room was already almost full. Nobles in their finest attire, servants carrying silver trays with wine and fruit, guards posted at regular intervals along the walls. The sound of conversations, laughter, and soft music filled the air. And then, as if a silent command had been given, the entire hall fell silent. Alaric had entered. He wore black, as always, but not the simple black of before. It was a full royal regalia, a velvet tunic with silver embroidery depicting ancient constellations, fitted black leather trousers, high polished boots. Over his shoulders, a cloak that seemed made of liquid darkness, fastened by silver wolf-shaped brooches. And on his head, finally, the crown, not the simple gold circlet I expected, but a wild creation of silver and obsidian, with points that resembled both moonbeams and wolf fangs. He was magnificent, terrifying, hypnotizing. When his eyes met mine across the hall, the world seemed to slow down. There were no more whispering nobles, no circulating servants, no music playing. There was only us, connected by that invisible thread that had formed in the well cavern. With an almost imperceptible gesture, he called me to his side. I took a deep breath and crossed the hall, feeling all eyes on me. Each step felt like a small eternity. When I finally reached the dais, he extended his hand, and before the surprised eyes of the entire court, I accepted it. "Good morning, Elena," he said, using my name for the first time in public. His voice was formal, but his eyes held the warmth of the previous night. "Your Majesty?" I replied, bowing in a curtsy I had practiced mentally all morning. He smiled, an almost imperceptible smile, and indicated a seat to his right. Not the Queen's throne, but an ornate chair that clearly did not belong to a common servant. The murmur in the hall immediately increased. I could feel the stares, hear the ill-contained whispers, and among them, standing out like poison in clear water, the furious gaze of Lady Ravenna, who occupied a prominent place among the nobles, her blood-red dress a silent war cry. Before I could sit, the trumpets sounded. The royal herald stepped forward, his voice echoing through the stone walls. His Grace, Duke Norrington of Westeria, and his retinue. The double doors opened and a procession entered the hall. At the front, a corpulent middle-aged man, grey-haired and neatly bearded, wearing the colours of Westeria, green and gold. Behind him, a retinue of knights, councillors, and ladies. And among them, like a malevolent shadow from my nightmares, Baron Ashworth. He had not changed, the same angular face, the same cold, stony eyes, the same rigid, arrogant bearing. When his gaze met mine, I saw first surprise, then anger, and finally a cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. The Duke approached the throne, making a bow that was more protocol than respect. "Your Majesty," he said, his grave voice filling the hall, "it is an honour to return to your kingdom for the Winter Assembly." "Duke Norrington," Alaric replied, his voice taking on the formal tone of the king. "Welcome. I hope your journey was uneventful. As uneventful as mountain paths allow, Your Majesty." The conversation continued with the usual formalities, questions about the journey, comments about the weather, observations about the health of common relatives. But I barely listened. My attention was fixed on the Baron, who remained a few steps behind the Duke, his eyes never leaving my face. Finally, after the initial courtesies, the Duke made a gesture, and the Baron stepped forward. "Your Majesty," the Duke said, "allow me to present Baron Ashworth, one of my most loyal vassals. He comes with a matter of a personal nature that he would like to discuss in your august presence." Alaric inclined his head slightly. "I am aware of the Baron's matter. Indeed, it involves my guest." He gestured in my direction, the movement casual yet laden with meaning. The Baron took another step forward, his cold eyes finally meeting the king's. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, the young woman in question is my legal ward, an orphan I took into my home out of Christian kindness, and who fled." "A lie," I interrupted, unable to contain myself. The entire hall gasped collectively. No one, absolutely no one interrupted a noble during a royal audience. The Baron paled, then flushed with anger. "You see, Your Majesty? No education, no manners. I beg your pardon for her wild behaviour. It is precisely why I must take her back, to complete her education and prepare her for a suitable marriage." Alaric raised his hand, and silence fell upon the hall like a heavy blanket. "Elena," he said, addressing me, but projecting his voice so all could hear, "do you wish to return with Baron Ashworth?" I gathered all the courage I possessed and stood, facing not only the Baron but the entire court, watching with ravenous interest. "No, Your Majesty. The Baron expelled me from his home upon discovering I was not his blood daughter, but his wife's with another man. I was cast into the streets with nothing, forced to beg and sleep in abandoned stables. If he wants me back now, it is only because he discovered my mother left an inheritance in my name." The Baron advanced, his face contorted with fury. "Lies, Your Majesty, do not allow this. This bastard to defy the word of a noble." "Watch your words, Baron," Alaric warned, his voice soft but laden with threat. "Miss Elena is under my protection." "On what legal basis?" the Duke interjected, his voice carefully neutral. "I understand there are feelings involved, Your Majesty, but there are laws governing the guardianship of orphans and wards. The Baron has documents proving his legal guardianship." Alaric stood, his height imposing, his presence dominating the entire hall. "On the oldest basis of all, Duke. The law of the wolf. A murmur ran through the hall. Even the Duke seemed momentarily disconcerted. The law of the wolf, he repeated, confused. Your Majesty, with all due respect, we are speaking of laws of the realm, not of folkloric traditions. Folkloric? Alaric repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Perhaps the Duke has forgotten whose lands he stands on, and under what laws this kingdom was founded. He descended the few steps of the dais, approaching the Duke and the Baron. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, but there was something primitive lurking beneath the surface. The wolf, waiting. Before there were dukes and barons, he continued, his voice echoing through the stone walls. Before there were paper titles and wax seals, there was the law of the wolf, and that law states that any member of the clan may claim protection for someone threatened by injustice. This is absurd, the Baron protested, looking to the Duke for support. We are in civilized times, not in ages of barbarism and superstition. Alaric smiled, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Civilization is merely a thin veneer over our true nature, Baron. Scratch the surface and you will see what we truly are. He turned to me, extending his hand. Elena, come here. I descended the steps and placed my hand in his, feeling the contained strength of those fingers, the warmth that emanated from his skin. Miss Elena has been claimed, Alaric announced, his voice rising so all in the hall could hear clearly. Not as a servant, not as a ward, but as an equal under the law of the wolf. Her inheritance will be protected in her name, inaccessible to any guardian or administrator until she reaches legal age or chooses her own path. The Baron's face twisted with rage. This is an outrage, a blatant theft. Theft? Alaric repeated, his voice cutting like ice. Curious that you use that word, Baron, considering you plan to marry your ward to the first suitor who offered you advantage, merely to control the money that, by right, is hers. How dare you insinuate— I do not insinuate, Alaric interrupted. I state, and I have proof. He made a gesture, and from the shadows at the back of the hall, a figure emerged, Brad, no longer dressed as a servant, but in the uniform of the Royal Guard, white shirt, dark blue vest, black trousers. He carried a sealed scroll of parchment, the Omega, Alaric introduced, now keeper of secrets of the crown. He intercepted your correspondence with Lord Berkeley, detailing your plans for Miss Elena's fortune. The Baron paled, his gaze darting nervously between the King, Brad, and me. The Duke, sensing the turn of the tide, took a discreet step to distance himself from his vassal. This is a misunderstanding, the Baron stammered. I only wanted what was best for the girl. Spare us your lies, Baron, Alaric cut him off. You stand before the King and the Alpha. Both can smell falsehood. He turned to the entire hall, his voice taking on the tone of a royal decree. By this means, I declare that Eleanor Ashworth, no longer a bastard, but the rightful heiress to her mother's name and fortune, is under the protection of the Crown and the Wolf Clan. Any attempt to claim her against her will shall be considered a direct offence to the throne. The silence that followed was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Then, slowly, Duke Norrington, ever the politician, made an elaborate bow. As always, Your Majesty's wisdom is incontestable, he said, casting a warning glance at the Baron. I am certain my vassal understands the situation and withdraws any claim over the young lady. The Baron, cornered, had no choice but to agree with a stiff nod. Alaric, satisfied, turned to me. Lady Eleanor, you are free to make your own decisions from now on. Your inheritance will be managed by the royal treasury until you are ready to assume it. And as for your residence? He hesitated, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. It was the man speaking now, not the King, not the Alpha. As for your residence, he continued, his voice softer, I would like to invite you to remain at court, as my personal guest, for as long as you wish. The invitation hung between us, laden with unspoken possibilities. It was not a marriage proposal, it was not a demand, it was not an order. It was exactly what I had asked for in the well cavern, a choice. I looked at Brad, who watched me with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. At the Baron, defeated but still dangerous. At Lady Ravenna, whose green eyes promised vengeance. At all the nobles watching, eager for the next act of this unexpected drama. And then, I turned my gaze to the man before me, no longer just the king, no longer just the Alpha, but Alaric, the man who had risked his throne and his political alliance to defend a nameless orphan. "I accept your invitation, Your Majesty," I replied, my voice clear and firm. "With gratitude and hope." Something gleamed in his eyes, relief, perhaps joy, before the king's mask returned to place. "Excellent," he said, turning to the court. "Now we have an assembly to begin. Duke Norrington, let us discuss the matters of the northern border in my study after lunch. Baron Ashworth, I suggest you retire to your chambers and reconsider your position at court." With a final gesture, he offered me his arm, and together we ascended back to the dais. Not as king and servant, not as alpha and contender, but as two people united by choice, not by obligation. The winter assembly had only just begun, and with it, a new story, no longer that of the bastard orphan and the lonely king, but that of Elena and Alaric, writing their own destiny under the law of the wolf. The days that followed the assembly were like a fever dream. Intense colours, extreme emotions, reality and fantasy mixing until I no longer knew where one ended and the other began. From bastard orphan to lady protected by the crown, the transformation was so abrupt that sometimes I pinched myself upon waking, certain I would return to the servant's cubicle at any moment, but I did not return. Instead, I was installed in chambers in the east wing of the castle, not in the royal quarters, which would have caused uncontrollable scandal, but in rooms worthy of a noble visitor. There was an antechamber decorated with blue and silver tapestries, a spacious bedroom with a four-poster bed, and even a small study with a dark wood desk, where I could read or write in privacy. Hilda had been assigned as my official lady-in-waiting, though I suspected her true role was more of a protector and counsellor. Two other young women completed my small retinue. Lena, a girl with honey-coloured hair and a shy smile, responsible for my wardrobe and hair, and Martha, older and more prim, who oversaw the organisation of my chambers and meals. On the morning of the fourth day after the assembly, I woke to the sound of laughter in the corridor. Lena and another maid I didn't recognise were chatting animatedly outside the door. When I got up to investigate, they fell silent, blushing as if they had been caught in childish mischief. "Forgive me, my lady," Lena murmured, making a small curtsy. "We didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't wake me," I assured, curiously observing the large flower arrangement the other maid carried. "What is that?" Lena exchanged a meaningful glance with her companion. "A gift, my lady, the third this week." The arrangement was stunning. Blue roses, certainly dyed as they did not exist naturally, silver lilies, and small white flowers that looked like delicate stars. In the centre, a single black rose, rare and mysterious. "From whom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "His Majesty doesn't leave a card, my lady," Lena replied, her eyes shining with contained excitement. "But everyone knows." "Everyone talks," I completed, sighing. "Don't they?" Lena nodded, unable to hide her enthusiasm. "The entire castle is buzzing, my lady. They say the king never sent flowers to anyone, not even to the late queen." The information hit me with unexpected force. If it was true, the gesture had an even deeper meaning than I imagined. "Place them in the antechamber," I instructed, trying to sound casual. "And Lena, prepare a bath for me, please. I have a meeting with the royal administrator this morning." As the young women withdrew to carry out my orders, it was still strange to give orders. When all my life I had been the one receiving them, I sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating the dizzying change in my destiny. 4 days. Only 4 days since I had confronted the Baron in the Great Hall, since Alaric had declared my freedom before the entire court. 4 days of a new life. A life of fine dresses, etiquette lessons, meals served on delicate china. A life where people bowed as I passed, where doors opened before I even touched them. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Because with every new privilege, with every new luxury, came also the acute awareness of the fragility of my position. I was not noble by birth, had no political alliances, owned no land beyond the small property my mother had left as inheritance. My only real protection was the king's favour, a favour that could disappear as quickly as it had appeared. And there was Lady Ravenna. Since the assembly, the noblewoman had made no attempt to approach me, but I felt her presence like a cold shadow watching, waiting. Her allies at court, and there were many, treated me with polite coldness, their gazes calculating how long the king's whim would last before natural order was restored. As for Alaric, it was complicated. We had not met alone since the night at the Well of Truth. He attended formal meals in the Great Hall, where we exchanged carefully neutral words under the watchful eyes of dozens of nobles. Sometimes he invited me to walk in the inner gardens, always accompanied by Hilda and at least 2 guards. Our encounters were rigidly choreographed, formal, almost impersonal. And yet, there were the gifts, the flowers, the rare books that mysteriously appeared in my study, ancient stories of the Wolf clan, poems from distant kingdoms, treatises on astronomy and philosophy, small gestures that said what words could not. Under the constant vigilance of the court, after my bath, I dressed with Lena's help a simple light blue wool dress, suitable for morning meetings, not for formal occasions. My meeting with the royal administrator, Lord Kellen, was to discuss my inheritance and how it would be managed until my 21st birthday. The administrator received me in his study on the ground floor of the castle, an austere room filled with parchments, ledgers and old maps. He was a middle-aged man, bald on top, with sharp eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. "Lady Elena," he greeted me with a brief bow. "Please sit," I obeyed, trying to maintain the posture Hilda had taught me, straight back, chin slightly raised, hands gently placed in my lap. "I have reviewed the documents related to your mother's inheritance," he began, leafing through a stack of parchments. "It is a modest property, but well managed. It includes a country house 2 days' journey from here, approximately 30 acres of arable land, a small apple orchard, and a considerable sum in gold and silver deposited in the royal bank." I listened to the details with growing surprise. I had never imagined my mother possessed so much, much less that she had ensured it all passed to me, not to the Baron. "How did she manage?" I murmured, more to myself than to the administrator. Lord Kellen looked up from the documents. "Your mother was a provident woman, my lady. The will was drafted and sealed weeks before her death, with all possible legal protections. She must have suspected that your adoptive father would try to take what was rightfully yours." I felt tears forming. My mother, the only mother I had known, even if not by blood, had protected me to the end, ensuring I had a future, even if she couldn't be there to see it. "When can I visit the property?" I asked, discreetly wiping away a tear. "Any time you wish, my lady. It is in good condition, with a couple of caretakers who have maintained it since your mother's death. By order of the king, I sent messengers to inform them of your existence and new position." The mention of Alaric brought me back to the present reality. And what about the administration? His Majesty mentioned that the royal treasury would handle everything until my birthday. Lord Kellen nodded. "Yes, but you need not worry. Your assets are being accounted for separately, and every coin spent or received will be documented for your review. Nothing will be touched without your explicit approval." "And after my birthday?" "After your 21st birthday, in exactly 23 days, he replied, consulting a calendar, "everything officially passes into your hands. You may manage it as you wish, live on the property if you desire, or sell it. It will be entirely your decision." The notion of such freedom was as strange as it was terrifying. All my life had been defined by others, the Baron, the streets, servitude in the castle, and now, in less than a month, I would have total control over my destiny. "What if I want to learn how to administer properly?" I asked impulsively. "I know nothing about accounts, contracts, commerce." Lord Kellen seemed surprised but not displeased. "That is unusual for a lady, but not impossible. I can assign one of my assistants to instruct you in the basic principles if you wish." "I do wish," I replied firmly. "I don't want to depend on others' goodwill forever. I need to learn to take care of what is mine." A slight smile touched the austere administrator's face. A sensible attitude, my lady. I see you are not just a pretty face, as some at court suggest. The comment, though probably well-intentioned, reminded me of the fragility of my position. To many, I was merely a new toy for the king, a temporary distraction that would soon be forgotten. After finalizing the details of my financial education, I left the administrator's office with my head swimming with numbers, legal terms, and future possibilities. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I almost collided with someone turning a corner. "Excuse me," I exclaimed, recoiling a step. "The pardon is mine, Lady Eleanor." I immediately recognized the deep voice, the slightly foreign accent. Duke Norrington watched me with sharp eyes, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," I murmured, making a quick curtsy. "I did not expect to find you in this part of the castle." "I have business with the royal administrator," he replied, studying me with ill-disguised interest. "As do you, apparently." "Yes," I confirmed without elaborating. Something about the Duke's presence made me uncomfortable. Not exactly threatening, but too calculating for my taste. "Interesting," he commented, as if speaking to himself. "Very interesting. What, my lord?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. A thin smile curved his lips. "To see you take charge of your affairs so quickly. Many young women in your position would be dazzled by royal attention, by the dresses and jewels, completely forgetting about the future." I couldn't determine if it was a compliment or veiled criticism. "I don't consider myself like many young women, Your Grace." "Clearly not." He stepped aside, indicating I could pass. "That is why, I suppose, you captured his interest." The indirect mention of Alaric made me hesitate. "His Majesty has been very kind to me." "Kind," the Duke repeated, as if the word were curious. "It's not the adjective I would choose to describe Alaric of the Lunar clan. But perhaps he shows you facets that others do not see." Something in the intimacy with which he spoke of the king surprised me. "Have you known His Majesty for a long time? Since he was a rebellious prince, fighting his own father for control of the clan?" The Duke seemed lost in memories for a moment. He was fierce even then, ruthless, but just in his own way. That information was new to me. I knew little about Alaric's past, about how he became king. The book on the Law of the Wolf briefly mentioned the current Alpha's ascent, but without personal details. "The clan chose well," the Duke commented, returning to the present, though many doubted at the time. "Did you doubt?" I asked, pushing my luck. An enigmatic smile was his only reply. Then, with a slight bow, he bid me farewell. "I have kept you too long, Lady Elena, but perhaps we can continue this conversation another time. There is much we could discuss." I watched him walk away, his green and gold cloak rippling behind him like water under a summer sun. There was something about that seemingly casual conversation that left me uneasy, as if the Duke was testing the waters, gauging my reaction, evaluating me for some purpose I couldn't discern. I continued my way back to my chambers, more aware than ever of the glances that followed me. Servants, guards, court ladies, all watched me with curiosity, speculation, or in some cases ill-disguised disdain. I was an enigma to them. An anomaly, neither servant nor noble, occupying an undefined space that no one knew exactly how to classify. Turning the last corner, I saw a familiar figure waiting before the door to my chambers. Brad, still wearing the Royal Guard uniform, but without his helmet, allowing his red hair to fall freely over his forehead. My heart tightened at the sight of him. Since the assembly, our interactions had been limited to brief nods when we crossed paths in the corridors. I knew his new position as Keeper of Secrets of the Crown kept him busy, but I suspected there was more behind his distancing. "Brad," I called softly, approaching him. He turned, his face briefly lighting up before returning to the professional mask he now wore. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted, too formally for my taste. His Majesty asked me to deliver this personally. He extended a small scroll of parchment, sealed with red wax marked with the wolf symbol. "What is it?" I asked, accepting the parchment with trembling fingers. "I do not know the contents," he replied, his gaze fixed on a point above my shoulder, avoiding my eyes. Only that it is for your eyes. Only. The discomfort between us was palpable, a chasm that hadn't existed before, created not by anger or resentment, but by circumstances neither of us had fully chosen. Brad. I tried again, my voice softer. Can we talk? Really talk like before? Something wavered in his gaze, pain, perhaps longing. I don't believe it would be prudent, my lady. Please don't call me that. Not when we're alone. I took a step toward him. It's still me. I'm still the same person who shared bread with you in that barn. He finally looked at me directly, and I saw in his eyes all the untold history between us, what could have been. In another life, another world. No, he said gently. You are no longer that person. And I am no longer that man. The truth of his words hit me hard. We had both changed, transformed by choices and circumstances beyond our control. Does that mean we can't even be friends? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Brad hesitated, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he sighed. I will always be your friend, Elena. I will always be here if you need me. But now there are distances we need to maintain. For your safety as much as for mine. My safety? I repeated, confused. The court watches, he said simply. And not everyone wishes you happiness. Lady Ravenna. He didn't need to say the name for me to understand the warning. Be careful who you trust, Brad continued, lowering his voice, and read his message in absolute privacy. With a last look laden with unspoken emotions, he bowed briefly and walked away, leaving me alone with the mysterious parchment and a heart heavy with transformed friendship. In my chambers, I dismissed Lena and Martha, asking not to be disturbed. I sat at the desk in the small study, staring at the red seal for long moments before finally breaking it. The handwriting was strong, angular, clearly masculine, but with an elegance that suggested refined education. The moon will be in its first quarter tonight. If you wish, meet me in the North Garden when the evening bell rings. Come alone without companions. There are matters we need to discuss away from curious eyes. Ha! I reread the message several times, my heart quickening. It was the first direct invitation for a private meeting since the night at the Well of Truth. What did Alaric want to discuss? And why the secrecy, the nocturnal meeting away from witnesses? Part of me was alarmed. Meeting alone with the king, at night, was exactly the kind of behavior that would fuel the worst rumors at court. But another part, deeper and less rational, yearned to see him again without the weight of masks and protocols. I tucked the parchment into a secret drawer in the desk, my decision already made before my mind could argue against it. Yes, I would go. I would face the consequences later, because amidst all the uncertainties, one thing I knew clearly, the dance between us had only just begun, and neither Alaric nor I yet knew what steps we would take. The day dragged on like an eternity. Each strike of the castle bell seemed slower than the last, each task I imposed upon myself to distract my mind, reading, embroidery, etiquette lessons with Hilda, seemed to stretch endlessly. The anticipation of the nocturnal encounter with Alaric was like an electrical current beneath my skin, impossible to ignore. When the sun finally began to set, painting my chambers with hues of gold and amber, I felt a growing restlessness. What should I wear? How would I explain my absence to Hilda and the other servants? What matters did Alaric want to discuss so secretly? I opted for simplicity, a dark blue wool dress unadorned except for a silver belt. Nothing that would draw undue attention if I were seen in the corridors. I pinned my hair in a low bun, leaving only a few loose strands framing my face. I'm going to bed early tonight, I announced to Hilda when she came to check if I needed anything before dinner. I have a headache. Please ask that I not be disturbed. Her experienced eyes studied me with ill-disguised skepticism. As you wish, my lady. Should I bring some herbal tea to ease the pain? It won't be necessary, I replied quickly. Perhaps too quickly. I just need silence and darkness. Hilda nodded slowly. As you wish. I'll be in the antechamber if you need anything. When she left, I released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Hilda suspected something, certainly, but she wouldn't ask direct questions. Not yet, at least. Hours crept by. I pretended to read one of the books Alaric had sent me, a treatise on constellations and their meaning in the ancient traditions of the clan. But I barely registered the words. My mind was in the North Garden, imagining what awaited me. Finally, the evening bell chimed. 9 deep tolls that reverberated through the stone walls of the castle. It was time. I waited a few minutes after the bell to give Hilda time to settle in the antechamber. Then, silently, I draped a dark cloak over my shoulders and slipped out of the room through a side door I had discovered days earlier, a rarely used service entrance that led to a narrow corridor. The castle at night was another world, deep shadows, space torches casting flickering light on ancient walls, occasional guards patrolling with raised spears. I kept close to the walls, avoiding the main paths, grateful for the stealth lessons learned during my days on the streets. The North Garden was the least frequented of the castle's gardens. Unlike the lush South Gardens, with their decorative flowers and fountains, the North was wild, almost somber, ancient trees with twisted trunks, unpruned bushes, and a small lake fed by an underground spring. It was also the closest to the forest that surrounded the castle, separated only by a low stone wall. When I arrived, the moon had already risen in the sky, a silver crescent that cast ghostly light over the silent garden. There was no sign of Alaric. For a moment of panic, I thought I might have misinterpreted the message or arrived at the wrong place. "You came." The voice came from behind me, startling me. I turned to find Alaric emerging from the shadows of an ancient oak. Like me, he wore simple clothes, black leather trousers, a white linen shirt under an unadorned dark doublet. Without his crown, without the royal cloak, he looked almost like an ordinary man. Almost. "Did you doubt I would come?" I asked, finding my voice. He approached, his movements silent as a predator's. "I would have understood if you chose not to come. The risks are considerable." "Risks," I repeated, feeling a chill that wasn't entirely due to the night air. "To your reputation. To your position at court." He stopped an arm's length away, his face partially illuminated by the moonlight. Meeting secretly with the king is not something that goes unnoticed, no matter how careful we are. "Then why ask me to come?" I challenged. "Why not talk during the day with appropriate companions?" A smile touched his lips. "Because what I have to say is not for ears other than yours. And because," he hesitated, something vulnerable passing through his gaze, "because I wanted to see you. Without masks, without the court watching every move." His unexpected honesty disarmed me. "I wanted to see you too," I confessed. "I feel as if we are playing roles in an elaborate theatre, every word measured, every gesture calculated." "That is exactly what we are doing," he agreed, gesturing for me to follow him deeper into the garden. Away from eyes that might observe us from the castle windows. The court is a theatre, and we are all actors. We walked side by side in silence for a few moments, our steps soft on the dew-damp grass. He led me to a stone bench near the small lake, partially hidden by flowering bushes. The moon reflected on the dark water, shimmering like liquid silver. "What did you want to discuss with me?" I asked when we sat, maintaining a respectful distance between us. Alaric contemplated the water for a few moments before replying. "Your safety." It was not what I expected. "My safety?" He nodded, his austere profile against the night. "Since the assembly, I have received troubling reports. Not everyone at court is pleased with your new position." "Lady Ravenna," I deduced. "Among others." His eyes met mine, dark and intense. "She has powerful allies. Her father, the Count of Westeria, controls strategic lands and has Duke Norrington's ear. The Duke approached me today," I revealed. "He seemed interested in me in some way." Alaric stiffened visibly. "What did he say?" I recounted the conversation, trying to remember the Duke's exact words. When I finished, Alaric was more relaxed, but still vigilant. "Norrington is an old fox," he commented, "always playing all sides of a conflict, waiting to see which will prevail before showing his true loyalties." "He seemed to know you well," I observed. "He spoke of when you were a rebellious prince." A dark smile touched Alaric's lips. "Do you know the story of how I became king?" I shook my head. "Only what the book mentions, that you assumed the throne after the death of your father, King Roland." A politely edited version. He looked at the starry sky, as if seeking words in the constellations. "The truth is more complicated." He stood abruptly, taking a few steps toward the water. His reflection rippled on the dark surface, fragmented and mysterious. "Roland was not just my father. he began, his voice low but clear in the stillness of the night. He was a tyrant, an alpha who confused cruelty with strength, fear with respect. He ruled the clan with iron claws and sharp teeth. I remained silent, feeling that any interruption would break the spell of that rare confidence. At 17, I openly challenged him after seeing him execute a man for a minor offense. His voice held an ancient pain, scarred but not forgotten. I was defeated, of course. I was a boy facing the dominant alpha. My punishment was exile, 3 years in the wild borders, without the right to the clan name, without protection. "What happened?" I asked when the silence stretched. Alaric turned to me, the moon reflected in his eyes. "I survived. I learned. I grew. I found allies among the smaller clans who had suffered under my father's yoke. And when I returned 3 years later, I was no longer a boy challenging a tyrant. I was an alpha wolf seeking his rightful territory." The implication was clear. "You challenged him again," he nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "A formal challenge according to the oldest laws of the clan. Combat until submission or death. And you won," I deduced, imagining the brutal scene, father and son fighting for the right to lead the clan. "I won," he confirmed, his voice devoid of any pride. "But I refused to kill him, even when he begged for death instead of the humiliation of defeat. I broke tradition. I allowed him to live, stripped of his title but not his life." "That was merciful," I offered, uncertain if it was the right word. A bitter sound escaped his throat, something between a laugh and a growl. Many disagreed, Duke Norrington among them. It was seen as weakness, as indecision. "The pup who cannot kill the old wolf," they said. "But you proved them wrong," I said, seeing now the man beyond the king, beyond the alpha. "You became a different ruler from your father." Alaric returned to the bench, sitting closer to me this time. I try to be. "Every day is a struggle, between the man and the wolf, between justice and power, between what is right and what is easy." I felt an irresistible urge to touch him, to offer some comfort for the pain I saw in his eyes. Slowly, as if approaching a wild animal, I extended my hand until my fingers lightly brushed his. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked softly, his fingers intertwined with mine, the touch gentle but firm. "Because I need you to understand what we are fighting against. It's not just Lady Ravenna or the Count, or even the Duke. It's an entire tradition, a way of thinking that sees any deviation from the established path as weakness. And I am a deviation," I concluded, finally understanding. "The bastard orphan whom the king favors instead of the designated noblewoman." "You are much more than that." His voice took on an intensity that made my heart race. "You are the first person in a long time who sees me as I am. Not just the king, not just the alpha, but the man behind the crowns." "Alaric," I murmured, his name still strange on my tongue, but somehow right. He brought my hand to his lips, gently kissing my knuckles. The gesture, simple but intimate, sent waves of warmth through my body. "There are rumors," he continued, his voice softer. "Whispers in the corridors. They say you are my secret mistress, that I use dark magic to keep you under my control, that I plan to discard you as soon as I tire of your pretty face." I swallowed hard, trying not to show how the words affected me. "And what does the truth matter in the face of such juicy rumors?" A genuine smile touched his lips. "You see, that's what fascinates me about you. Your strength, your humor even in the face of adversity." "I learned early that tears don't solve problems," I replied, remembering the harsh lessons of the streets. "But I still don't understand what you want from me, Alaric. What role am I to play in this courtly theatre?" His gaze intensified, his hand squeezing mine more tightly. "I want you to be yourself. The woman who chose her own path in the Well Cavern. The woman who challenged a king. And what price will I pay for that authenticity? What price will you pay?" He released my hand, rising again. The restlessness in his movements revealed the inner conflict my questions provoked. "There is a solution," he said finally. "One that would silence the rumors, protect your position, and satisfy the court's expectations." My heart skipped a beat, anticipating what would come next. "Marriage," I concluded for him. Alaric nodded, turning to face me. "A formal alliance. You would become queen, under protection not only of the crown, but of the oldest laws of the clan. The proposal hung between us, heavy with implications. It was not a request born of love, but of political practicality, a solution to a problem, not the culmination of a romance. "And what would happen to your alliance with Westeria?" I asked, forcing myself to think clearly despite the whirlwind of emotions. "To the plans for Lady Ravenna? There would be consequences," he admitted. "The Count would be furious. Norrington would likely withdraw support temporarily. Alliances would have to be renegotiated, compensations offered." That seems a high price to pay for an orphan with no political connections. Something wild and possessive gleamed in his eyes. "You are worth every sacrifice." The words sent a shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of a more complex feeling I couldn't quite name. "And if I say no?" I asked, needing to understand all options, all possible paths. "Then I will continue to protect you as best I can," he replied without hesitation. "I will safeguard your inheritance, ensure your safety. You will be free to follow the path you choose, whether at court or on your property in the countryside." I studied his face in the silver moonlight, searching for any sign of manipulation or falsehood. I found none, only the same raw honesty he had shown in the well cavern. "Don't answer me now," he said, softening his tone. "It is a decision that will change your life, for better or worse. Think carefully, consult your heart." "How much time do I have?" I asked. "Until the next full moon," he replied. 20 days from today. Enough time to consider all the implications, all the pros and cons. 20 days. Only 20 days to decide the course of my entire future life. To choose between security as queen or independence as lady of my own property. Between a man who fascinated and terrified me in equal measure and a future I could shape with my own hands. "I will think carefully," I promised. He nodded, seeming satisfied. "That is all I ask." We stood in silence for a few moments, letting the night envelop our unspoken words. Then, as if obeying an irresistible impulse, Alaric approached again. "There is something else I must say," he murmured, his voice lower, more intimate. "Something the king should not admit, but that the man can no longer deny." My heart raced. "What?" "That whatever your decision, Elena, my wolf has already made his." His fingers touched my face so lightly it felt almost like imagination. "From the first moment I saw you on the night of the feast, something in me recognized something in you. Something ancient, primal. The claim," I whispered, remembering the words from the book. "Not just that," he corrected. "Something rarer, more frightening." Before I could ask what he meant, a distant sound broke the moment, the sound of approaching footsteps, voices of guards calling to each other. "The night patrol," Alaric murmured, stepping back quickly. "You need to go." I stood, adjusting my cloak over my shoulders. "And you?" A lupine smile curved his lips. "The king can walk wherever he wishes, even at night. You, however, would have no acceptable explanation," I completed. He nodded, indicating a path partially hidden by bushes. "Go that way. It leads to a side entrance near the east wing. You won't be seen." I started to walk away but stopped, turning one last time. "Alaric?" "Yes?" "What is rarer and more frightening than the claim?" I asked, needing to know what he had almost revealed. He hesitated, the guard's footsteps drawing closer. "The recognition of souls," he finally replied, his words almost a whisper. "When the wolf and the man choose the same companion, not out of duty, not out of desire, but out of completeness." Before I could process the profound meaning of those words, he gestured urgently. "Go, now!" I obeyed, slipping through the shadows with my heart pounding. Not just because of the near discovery, not just because of the marriage proposal, but because of his last words, which reverberated in my mind like an enchantment. Recognition of souls. That night, lying in my bed, watching the crescent moon through the window, I realized that the decision I faced was even more complex than I initially imagined. It wasn't just a choice between security and independence, between crown and freedom. It was a choice between following the safe path or risking everything for something I barely understood. But that made my heart sing in a way I had never experienced before. 20 days to decide. 20 days to discover who I truly was and what I truly wanted. And as sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed of wolves running under the moonlight, free and wild as I could never be. The sun had not yet risen when I woke the next morning, my mind tumultuous with the night's dreams. Silver wolves running through endless forests, the full moon illuminating their path and I somehow running among them, neither human nor animal but something between two worlds, a dream so vivid that I could still taste wild freedom in my mouth. The days that followed my encounter with Alaric in the North Garden were a delicate dance between expectations and reality. On the surface, nothing had changed. I remained Lady Eleanor, protected by the crown, attending formal meals in the Great Hall, learning etiquette with Hilda and administration. With Lord Kellen's assistance, Alaric remained the king, distant and formal in public, his eyes rarely meeting mine for more than a few seconds. But beneath this facade of normalcy, everything had changed. The rumours at court, instead of diminishing, grew like weeds after a summer rain. Servants whispered in the corridors as I passed. Noble ladies studied me with calculating eyes, measuring my clothes, my posture, my worth as a potential threat or ally. On my 5th day as a royal guest, Lady Elspeth, an elderly noblewoman who had served as lady-in-waiting to the late Queen, approached me as I walked through the South Gardens. "Lady Elena," she called, her voice thin but authoritative. "A moment, if you please." I stopped, waiting for her to catch up. Her white hair was perfectly arranged under a lace coif, and though her body was frail with age, her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Madam," I greeted, making a respectful curtsy. She assessed me from head to toe, a slight frown indicating she found flaws, though she did not mention them directly. "You often walk alone," she observed. It was not a question. "I appreciate the fresh air and moments of reflection," I replied carefully. She moved to walk beside me, her steps small but determined. In my day, young ladies never walked unescorted, especially those whose position was delicate. The veiled comment did not go unnoticed. "My position?" I asked, feigning innocence. Lady Elspeth let out a sound between a sigh and a huff. "Don't play the fool, girl. It doesn't suit you. You know exactly what I refer to. The king's favourite, without title by birth, without family to protect her." The term favourite made my face flush, but I maintained my composure. "I am under the protection of the crown, my lady. And I have designated ladies-in-waiting, whom you dismiss regularly," she observed, her eyes narrowing. Like now, it was true. I had asked Lena to leave me alone for an hour, wanting space to organise my tumultuous thoughts. "I occasionally need solitude," I defended myself. "What we need and what is prudent rarely coincide," she replied, her tone softening slightly. "Especially for women in our position." "Our position?" I asked, surprised by the inclusive pronoun. Lady Elspeth stopped before a rose bush, delicately touching a white flower with wrinkled fingers. "You are not the first woman whose position at court depends entirely on the favour of a powerful man, child. Nor will you be the last." The implication made me uncomfortable. "My situation is different," she interrupted, raising a white eyebrow. "They all think so." We remained silent for a few moments, the only sound being the distant buzz of bees among the flowers and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "You don't seem the type to offer advice freely." A thin smile touched her lips. "Perceptive. I like that," she resumed walking, gesturing for me to follow. "I served Queen Isabel for 15 years until her death. I saw what grief did to the king. I saw how he changed." "What was he like before?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity about the man who now dominated my thoughts. "Less controlled," she replied after a moment of reflection. "More open. He laughed easily, danced at celebrations, participated in hunts and tournaments. He and Isabel were—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Complimentary. She, refined and diplomatic. He, vigorous and direct. And after he became only the king, only the alpha, as if the man had been buried with her." The description echoed what I myself had perceived in Alaric, the division between the man and his duties, the carefully maintained barrier. "Until recently," Lady Elspeth added, casting me a meaningful glance, What do you mean? The castle has eyes, child. Eyes that see a king who suddenly smiles again. Who sends flowers. Who visits the north garden under the moonlight when he thinks no one is watching. I felt the blood drain from my face. Our secret meeting had not been as secret as we imagined. Don't be alarmed, she continued, noticing my reaction. Few know. I have my own sources more reliable and discreet than the usual gossips. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Lady Elspeth stopped again, turning to face me directly. Despite her diminutive stature, there was an authority in her presence that commanded respect. Because you are at a crossroads, child, whether you realize it or not, and your choices in the coming days will affect not only your destiny, but possibly that of the entire kingdom. You're exaggerating, surely, I protested, though I felt the weight of her words. I'm too old for exaggerations, she retorted dryly. I have seen kingdoms fall because of choices made in the heat of passion. I have seen alliances destroyed by wounded pride. I thought of the alliance with Westeria, of the Count and his daughter Ravenna, of Duke Norrington watching everything with calculating eyes. What do you suggest I do? I asked, recognizing the wisdom of her years. First, never walk alone again, she instructed firmly. Always with companions, not just for appearances, but for real safety. Do you believe I am in danger? She did not answer directly. Second, learn to distinguish between true allies and false friends. The court is a nest of vipers, and you, my dear, are a newly arrived mouse. The analogy was not flattering, but accurate. How do I differentiate? Observe who speaks well of you when they think you are not listening. Observe who offers you help without asking for anything in return. And most importantly, her eyes narrowed, observe who approaches Lady Ravenna after speaking with you. The warning was clear. Spies and informants were everywhere. And third? I asked, sensing there was more. Lady Elspeth smiled, a genuine smile this time, which softened the lines of age on her face. Third, if your heart has already made a choice, do not let fear prevent you from following it. Just make sure it is truly your heart speaking, and not just the dazzle of a girl before power and attention. Her words hit me with unexpected force. It was exactly the question I was grappling with. How to separate the attraction to the man from the fascination with the crown. How to distinguish between true love and the gratitude of an orphan for security and protection. How can I know? I asked, my voice betraying the vulnerability I tried to hide. Lady Elspeth touched my face with surprisingly gentle fingers. Ask yourself, if he were just Alaric without a crown, without a throne, without the power of the clan, would you still choose him? And more importantly, if you were just Elena, without your mother's inheritance, without a position at court, would he still choose you? The question echoed within me like a bell, reverberating in spaces I didn't even know existed. It was the fundamental question, wasn't it? The core of everything. Thank you, I murmured, genuinely grateful for the unexpected wisdom. Don't thank me yet, she replied, returning to her pragmatic tone. Now call your lady-in-waiting. It is not appropriate for us to converse so long without witnesses. We are already fueling enough gossip. In the following days, I diligently followed Lady Elspeth's advice. I never again walked alone through the corridors or gardens, always accompanied by Lena or Martha, occasionally by Hilda. I carefully observed the interactions at court, noting who smiled at me when they thought no one was looking, and who whispered with Lady Ravenna after approaching me with false amiability. And, more importantly, I reflected deeply on the questions the old lady had planted in my mind. Alaric without a crown, Elena without an inheritance, stripped of everything except our most basic essences, would we still choose each other? The answer did not come easily. Each time I thought I had found clarity, doubts arose again, blurring my certainties like passing clouds obscuring the sun. In my second week as a royal guest, I received an unexpected invitation. Not from Alaric, but from Brad. The Keeper of Secrets requests your presence in the North Tower after lunch. My lady, Lena informed me, handing me a small, unsealed parchment. The North Tower housed the castle's smaller library and the royal scribe's quarters. A place of knowledge, not power. Neutral territory in a way. When I arrived, accompanied by Martha as protocol dictated, Brad awaited me before a dark, wooden door. He wore the Royal Guard uniform, as always now, but there was something different in his posture, more confident, more established. "Lady Eleanor," he formally greeted, bowing his head. "I thank you for accepting my invitation." "Keeper," I replied, equally formal, aware of Martha's attentive ears. Brad turned to my companion. "If you would wait here, Miss Martha. What I have to show Lady Eleanor is of a confidential nature, by direct order of His Majesty." Martha hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of leaving me alone with a man, even a crown official. "My lady." "It's quite all right," I assured. "The keeper is a loyal servant of the crown." Reluctantly, she nodded, positioning herself near the door as Brad opened it for me. The room beyond was small, but cozy. Shelves of books covered the walls, an oak table occupied the center, and a tall window offered a view of the distant mountains. The aroma of parchment, ink, and candle wax filled the air. "What is so confidential that you needed to see me in private?" I asked as soon as the door closed behind us. Brad did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, observing the horizon for a few moments. "Do you remember the day we met?" he finally asked, his voice softer, closer to the Brad I had known on the streets. The question caught me off guard. "In the lower city market. You were trying to steal bread from the same stall as me." A smile touched his lips, and we ended up running away together, sharing the only piece we managed to snatch. The memory brought an unexpected warmth to my chest. Two hungry teenagers, united by necessity, sharing the little they had. "Why are you asking me this now?" I questioned, confused by the direction of the conversation. Brad finally turned to me. "Because I need you to remember who we were, who we are, beneath all these new clothes and borrowed titles." He approached the table, indicating an open map on it. "Come see this." I obeyed, curious. It was a detailed map of a property. Fields, orchard, main house, stables, even a small lake fed by a winding stream. "What is this?" "Your inheritance," he replied simply. "Your mother's property, a 2-hour ride from here." I studied the map with growing interest. "How did you get this?" "I am the keeper of secrets now," he replied with a touch of pride. "I have access to archives few even know exist." I ran my fingers over the parchment, trying to imagine the real place those lines represented. "My land, my home, if I so chose. Did you visit it?" I asked. Brad nodded. "Yesterday. On official duty, to check the security and condition of the property." "And what is it like?" His eyes lit up. "Beautiful, peaceful. The fields are fertile, the orchard is well tended. The main house is simple but solid. 3 bedrooms, a living room with a large fireplace, a spacious kitchen." The description created vivid images in my mind. A place of peace far from court intrigues, far from judging eyes and malicious whispers. The caretakers, Thomas and Martha, are a middle-aged couple, dedicated and honest. They have taken care of everything as if it were their own, waiting for the day the young lady would return. "They know about me?" I asked, surprised. "Your mother spoke of you until the end," Brad replied gently. "She told them that one day you would return to claim what was rightfully yours." I felt tears forming. The unexpected connection to a mother I barely remembered hitting me like a wave on a calm beach. "Why are you showing me this, Brad?" I asked, discreetly wiping away a tear that had escaped. He hesitated, as if carefully measuring his next words. "Because I want you to know you have options, that you are not trapped here, that there is a place waiting for you if—" He cut himself off, looking away. "If I don't accept the king's marriage proposal," I completed for him. Brad stiffened visibly. "So he really proposed? It wasn't a question." "How did you know?" "I am the keeper of secrets," he repeated, a sad smile curving his lips. "And I saw him that night in the North Garden. I saw how he looked at you, how you looked at him." Embarrassment warmed my face. "It wasn't—" "You don't need to explain," he interrupted, raising his hand. "I am not here to judge nor to interfere. I am here to ensure you have all the necessary information before making your decision." I studied his face, looking for signs of resentment or jealousy, but found only genuine concern. The Brad I had known on the streets, loyal, protective, always putting my well-being above his own. "Do you really think I should refuse?" I asked directly. "What I think doesn't matter," he replied, deflecting the question. "What matters is what you want, truly want deep in your heart." "What if I don't know what I want?" He smiled, a gentle smile that reminded me of nights under the stars, sharing impossible dreams. "You know, you're just afraid to admit it." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps beneath all the layers of doubt and uncertainty, I had already made my choice without even consciously realizing it. "How long until my birthday?" I asked, turning my attention back to the map. 12 days, Brad replied. "The day after, you can legally take possession of all this without need for guardians or administrators. You can go there, live your own life, away from court and its intrigues. Or I can accept Alaric and become queen," I murmured, almost to myself. Brad did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with contained emotion. "Eleanor, whatever your choice, I want you to know that you will always have a friend in me. Even if our paths go in different directions." I raised my eyes to meet his, seeing there all the history we shared. Hunger, cold fear, but also laughter, shared warmth, comfort found in the worst moments. "Thank you," I said, meaning much more than for the information about the property. "For everything." He nodded, understanding what I didn't say. "There's one more thing you need to know before you decide." "What?" "Lady Ravenna will not accept rejection peacefully," he warned, his tone shifting to something more serious, more urgent. "She has been receiving frequent messages from her father. The Count is mobilizing allies, seeking support among other nobles. There are rumors that he plans something before your birthday." The warning sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of something?" "I don't know the details," Brad admitted. "But be vigilant. Don't trust drinks offered by strangers. Don't walk alone even inside the castle. Don't accept gifts whose origin you cannot verify." The seriousness of his tone made it clear he wasn't exaggerating. "Did you tell the king about these suspicions?" Brad nodded. "He doubled the guard in your chambers and ordered all your food to be tasted before being served. But he cannot be everywhere at once, especially with the winter assembly still underway." We stood in silence for a few moments, the weight of the revelations hanging between us. Finally, Brad carefully rolled up the map, handing it to me. "Keep it," he said. "Study it. Know every inch of the land that can be yours. Whatever your decision, let it be made with full knowledge of all your options." I accepted the map, holding it against my chest like a talisman. "How can I thank you?" A sad smile touched his lips. "Be happy, Elena. It's all I ever wanted for you." When I left the North Tower, with Martha faithfully following a few steps behind, my mind was more tumultuous than ever. 12 days until my birthday. 8 days until the full moon, when Alaric would expect my answer. And somewhere in the corridors of this same castle, enemies were plotting, waiting for me to stumble. The court's game had never seemed so dangerous, nor the stakes so high. The week that followed brought with it the growing tension of waiting. Preparations for the closing of the winter assembly were in full swing, with delegations beginning to make plans to depart. The castle vibrated with an almost feverish energy. Servants rushing through corridors, nobles holding last-minute meetings, documents being signed and sealed hourly. Amidst all this activity, I felt strangely out of place, like an island of stillness in a stormy sea. I spent hours in my chambers studying the map Brad had given me, imagining a life away from court, on my own land. Other times I wandered through the castle halls and gardens, always properly accompanied, observing the life that could be mine if I accepted Alaric's proposal. Queen. The word still seemed absurd, impossible. I, who had grown up being called bastard and servant, wearing the crown and sitting on the throne beside the most powerful man in the kingdom. The idea was so fantastic that sometimes I laughed to myself, to the concern of my ladies-in-waiting. 5 days before the full moon, I was invited to an unusual event, an exclusively female soirée, organised by Lady Elspeth in the chambers that once belonged to the late Queen. The invitation arrived during breakfast, delivered by a young servant on a silver tray. "What is a soirée?" I asked Hilda as I read the small parchment decorated with delicately painted flowers. "A social gathering, usually in the afternoon or early evening. she explained, examining the invitation over my shoulder. "This one seems intended only for the ladies of the court. There will be music, conversation, perhaps poetry or readings." "Should I go?" I asked, uncertain. Hilda nodded firmly. "Absolutely. It is an honor to be invited by Lady Elspeth, and a rare opportunity to meet the women of the court in a more intimate setting, away from male eyes." The prospect was simultaneously intriguing and terrifying. Until now, my contacts with noble ladies had been limited to formal greetings and superficial conversations during meals or official events. The idea of spending hours in their company, without the protective shield of Alaric's presence, made me deeply uncomfortable. "Will Lady Ravenna be there?" I asked, the concern evident in my voice. "Almost certainly," Hilda confirmed, her wrinkled face taking on an expression of determination. "But do not worry. No lady would dare cause a scene in the royal chambers, under Lady Elspeth's watchful eye." I did not share her confidence, but I knew that refusing the invitation would be seen as an insult, perhaps even as cowardice. And if there was one thing I had learned in my weeks at court, it was that showing weakness was inviting attacks. Thus that afternoon, I dressed with special care, a light blue silk dress with sheer sleeves embroidered with small silver flowers, my hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, with a few strands braided with ribbons the same colour as the dress. I wore only one piece of jewellery, the crescent moon pendant Alaric had sent me days earlier, a delicate silver piece that rested at the base of my neck. "You look perfect, my lady," Lena assured, adjusting one last unruly strand. Elegant but not ostentatious, balance was crucial. Dressing too richly would be seen as presumption. Excessive simplicity would be interpreted as insecurity. Every choice at court was a statement, every detail analysed and judged. Hilda accompanied me to the Queen's chambers, on the highest floor of the West Wing. When we arrived, I was surprised by the number of ladies already present, at least 20 women of various ages, from young women barely older than me to grey-haired matrons. The space was stunning, very different from what I had imagined. Instead of the ostentatious opulence that characterised the rest of the castle, the Queen's chambers were a study in restrained elegance, soft colours, delicate yet comfortable furniture, tapestries that told ancient stories without screaming for attention. Large windows allowed generous light, and vases of fresh flowers perfumed the air. Lady Elspeth received me at the door, elegant in a pearl grey dress that complemented her white hair. "Lady Elena," she greeted, lightly kissing my cheek. "Welcome to the Moon Circle." "Moon Circle?" I repeated, confused. A mysterious smile curved her thin lips. "The oldest tradition of the clan's women. You will learn." She led me inside, formally introducing me to the other ladies. Some I already knew by sight. Others were completely new to me. Each greeted me with varying degrees of warmth, from genuine smiles to cold nods of recognition. Lady Ravenna was present, as expected, stunning in a dark red dress that contrasted dramatically with her pale skin and black hair. Her green eyes assessed me with a mixture of disdain and calculated curiosity when Lady Elspeth formally introduced us. "Lady Ravenna," I greeted, making the appropriate curtsy for someone of superior status. "Lady Elena," she replied, her melodious voice laden with false sweetness. "What a pleasure to finally converse properly. I have observed your meteoric rise with great interest." The comment was deliberately ambiguous, hovering on the border between compliment and insult. Several ladies nearby discreetly turned to hear my response. "It is kind of you to notice," I replied, keeping my tone light, "though I see my current position more as a return to what should always have been, not an ascent." Something dangerous gleamed in her eyes, but her smile remained fixed. Fascinating perspective. "We should discuss this more later." Before I could reply, Lady Elspeth clapped her hands delicately, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies, let us begin our soirée. The crescent moon invites us to renewal and new beginnings." It was then that I noticed a detail that had escaped my initial observation. All the women present wore some form of lunar symbol. A brooch, an earring, a hairband. Instinctively, I touched the pendant on my neck, feeling an unexpected connection to that circle of women. The soirée began with music. A young woman played a harp while another sang an ancient melody, words in a language I did not fully recognize but which sounded vaguely familiar. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost like an invocation. When the music ceased, Lady Elspeth took the center of the room, holding a crystal goblet filled with a clear liquid that shimmered like mercury under the light. The moon circle has existed since the first Alpha united the clans under his leadership, she explained, her voice taking on a ceremonial tone. While men guide the kingdom with claws and teeth, we, the women of the clan, preserve their traditions, their secrets, their deepest essence. She raised the goblet. We drink from the water of memory, collected under the crescent moon, blessed by the elders. Through it, we connect to all the women who came before us, to all who will come after. A shiver ran down my spine. There was something primal in that ritual, something that resonated on levels my rational mind couldn't fully grasp. The goblet was passed from woman to woman, each taking a small sip before passing it on. When it reached me, I hesitated, remembering Brad's warning about drinks of unknown origin. Lady Elspeth, noticing my hesitation, smiled gently. The water cannot be poisoned, child. Those with impure intentions cannot touch it without it turning murky. I looked at the crystalline liquid, then at the expectant faces around me. To refuse would be an unforgivable insult, a declaration that I did not consider myself part of that tradition, that lineage of women. I brought the goblet to my lips and took a small sip. The liquid was surprisingly sweet and cool, leaving a sensation of warmth that spread from my chest to the rest of my body. When the last woman drank, Lady Elspeth resumed the center of the room. Now, as is tradition in circle gatherings, each of us will share a truth or a question. What is said in the circle remains in the circle, protected by the oath of the moon. One by one, the women began to speak. Some shared personal stories, childhood memories, challenges overcome, small daily triumphs. Others asked questions seeking advice or clarity. When it was Lady Ravenna's turn, an expectant silence fell over the room. My truth, she said, her voice clear as a crystal bell, is that I love a man who is about to make the greatest mistake of his life. All the women's eyes turned to me, some with sympathy, others with cruel curiosity. I kept my face carefully neutral, though I felt my blood pounding in my temples. And my question, Ravenna continued, her green eyes fixed on mine, is why a girl without birthright, without lineage, without understanding of the clan's traditions, believes herself worthy of sitting beside the Alpha? The challenge was direct, undeniable. The entire room held its breath, awaiting my response. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the water of memory still in my system. When I reopened them, a strange calm had settled in my chest. My truth, I began, surprised by the firmness of my own voice, is that I was not born noble, but neither was I born to serve. I was deprived of my name, my inheritance, and my place by those who feared what I might become. I stood slowly, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed flowing through me. And my question is not why I would be worthy of the Alpha, but why the Alpha would be worthy of me. Because a throne, a crown, an ancient name, none of that makes a man deserving of a woman's heart. Only his actions, his character, his soul revealed in moments of choice. The silence that followed was absolute, as if the very air had frozen. Then, unexpectedly, Lady Elspeth began to applaud, slowly, deliberately. One by one, other women joined until almost all were clapping. Only Lady Ravenna and her closest allies remained motionless, faces fixed in masks of forced courtesy. The eagle does not need to prove it flies higher than the hen, Lady Elspeth said, an enigmatic smile on her lips. It simply spreads its wings. The rest of the soiree passed in a lighter atmosphere, more music, poetry, even traditional clan dances. Lady Ravenna and her small circle kept their distance, conversing in low voices, casting me occasional icy glances. I was about to leave when a woman I hadn't noticed before approached, a middle-aged lady with brown hair streaked with grey and surprisingly blue eyes, almost the same shade as Alaric's. Lady Eleanor, she greeted, her voice low but firm. I am Lady Isolde, sister of the late King Roland. Alaric's aunt. I curtsied deeply, surprised not to have been introduced to her before. "Madam, it is an honor." "The pleasure is mine," she replied, studying me with sharp eyes. "You have caused quite a stir in our little world, did you know?" "It was not my intention," I replied honestly. A smile curved her lips. "The greatest changes are rarely intentional, my dear. Come, walk with me to the balcony. There is something I would like to show you." I headed toward her when I felt a hand on my arm, holding me with surprising strength for such delicate fingers. Lady Ravenna leaned close to my ear, her amber and clove perfume enveloping me like smoke. "Be careful with your words, little bastard," she whispered, so low that only I could hear. "You may have impressed some old fools today, but the game has only just begun. And unlike you, I was born knowing the rules." Before I could reply, she moved away, gliding among the other guests with the fluid grace of a dancer. Lady Isolde, noticing our brief interaction, raised an inquisitive eyebrow when I joined her on the balcony. The view was stunning. The sun was beginning to set, painting the valley with golden and crimson hues. The distant forest a dark line against the flaming horizon. "Ravenna is desperate," Lady Isolde commented as if remarking on the weather. "Desperation makes people dangerous." "She threatened me," I admitted, still feeling the phantom grip of her fingers on my arm. "Naturally," the elder woman agreed without seeming surprised. "She staked everything on becoming queen. Her father invested years cultivating that alliance. And now, in a matter of weeks, you threaten to destroy all that work." I leaned on the stone railing of the balcony, watching birds fly back to their nests. "I didn't choose this role," I murmured. "No one chooses their destiny." "My dear," Lady Isolde replied, her tone softening. "Only how we respond to it when it arrives." She removed a small object from a pouch at her waist, an ancient silver medallion, engraved with symbols I recognized from Alaric's book. "This belonged to his mother," she explained, extending it to me. "She died when he was only 7. Roland never fully recovered. He turned his grief into rage, his loss into cruelty." I took the medallion with reverent care, feeling its solid weight in my palm. The surface was polished from constant use, the symbols almost worn away in some places. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because you need to understand the man before you decide whether to accept the king," she replied simply. "Alaric grew up under the shadow of a father who confused strength with brutality, power with domination. He swore to be different, and he has tried every day since he took the throne." "He told me about the challenge," I revealed. "About how he spared his father's life against tradition," Lady Isolde nodded. "The first of many acts that defied clan expectations. He ruled with justice when he could have ruled with fear. He sought alliances when he could have demanded submission. And now he is considering marrying a nameless bastard, when he could strengthen the kingdom with a powerful alliance," I completed. "Exactly." She touched my face with gentle fingers, a surprisingly maternal gesture. "What Ravenna and the others don't understand is that Alaric never cared for the easy path, only the right path." I offered the medallion back, but she shook her head. "Keep it," she said. "It was meant to be given to the woman he chose as his companion. Isabel wore it for a while, but she never truly understood it. Never understood what it means to carry the blood of the wolf." "And you think I understand?" I asked, genuinely curious. An enigmatic smile touched her lips. "I saw how you responded to Ravenna today. Without hatred, without fear, only truth. The wolf recognizes truth when it hears it." She closed my fingers over the medallion. "Take it, think about what it means. And when the full moon arrives, you will know your answer." That night, lying in my bed, I twirled the medallion between my fingers, watching how the crescent moonlight played over the ancient symbols. I felt as if I were on the edge of a precipice, about to take a step that would change everything forever. 3 days until the full moon. 3 days to make my final choice. And somewhere in the castle, Lady Ravenna also waited, her green eyes calculating, planning, promising retribution for the humiliations suffered in the moon circle. The game had only just begun, as she had said, but now I was beginning to understand the rules. And more importantly, I was beginning to believe I could win.